Well, hey, my name's Bryan Smith. I'm one of the pastors here at Doxology. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning. If it's your first time here, special welcome to you. Really, really glad you're here. Hey, has there ever been a time in your life where you have been forced to ask yourself the question, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes? I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. I actually just realized last night that the neighborhood that I live in here in Fort Worth has more people in it than the entire town that I grew up in. And so I am a small town guy. And, being back in my small town growing up, it may be difficult to tell by looking at me today, but I was like a decent athlete growing up. And my favorite sport to play was football. And that's probably the sport that I was best at. And I was like small town Oklahoma good at football. And so whenever actually after my senior year, I got asked to play in the Oklahoma All-State football game. And so I was excited to go play in that. And I'll never forget my first week of practice for the All-State game. We had a week's worth of practice heading into the game at the end of that week. And I remember I showed up and I'm kind of sizing myself up to the competition around me. And I look across me and there is a guy named Chris Massey. Okay, Chris Massey, he would go on next year to be a freshman All-American at Oklahoma State University. And so I was like, okay. I played receiver on our team, and the other receiver on our team was a guy named Rashawn Woods, who would eventually become a first-round draft pick to the San Francisco 49ers. Our quarterback on our team that year was a guy named Jason White, who 4 years later would go on to win the Heisman Trophy, okay? And so I'm sitting there, and it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that small-town Oklahoma good at football is not going to cut it to be a part of this team. And I remember walking back from practice just kind of that first day thinking to myself, why am I even here? Why am I here? Do I have what it takes to be a part of this team? And I didn't, just so you know, I did not have what it takes to be a part of that team. But I've had that feeling a lot of times in my life. I remember when our son Cooper was born at the hospital, and we're done, we're getting ready to check out. And I was like, okay, what do I need? And they're just like, a car seat. I'm like, literally, that's all I need to bring home this child is a car seat. Like, shouldn't I have to take a test or something before you trust me with another human life? They're like, no, you're good. I'm like, am I supposed to be here? Do I have what it takes to be a parent? Do I have what it takes? I've asked myself that question in so many situations and so many different circumstances in my life. Do I have what it takes to do this job? Do I have what it takes to be a husband? Do I have what it takes to be a father? Do I have what it takes to fulfill the different responsibilities that life is inevitably going to throw my way? But probably one of the areas where I have asked myself that question the most, at least with the most uncertainty, okay, with the most uncertainty, it has to do with just faith. And I've asked myself, do I have what it takes to be a Christian? Do I have what it takes to be a person who follows Jesus? Do I have what it takes? Have you ever looked around and felt like other people are better suited for the Christian life than you? Man, they just know more than me. They're better people than me. They have bigger faith than me. And as you kind of look around and size yourself up, you kind of find yourself wondering, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes to be a Christian? Maybe you're here and you wouldn't really consider yourself a spiritual person. That was me when I was growing up. I was around church, but it just wasn't something that really I wanted to do. But if you're here and you're like, man, if I wanted to give Jesus a chance, do you ever find yourself wondering, could I? Could I do, if I wanted to follow Jesus, is that something I could even do? Do I have what it takes to follow Jesus? Hey, if you have your Bibles, you can open them up to Mark chapter 2. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it. We're going to have the verses on both of the screens to my right and to my left. You can actually follow along with me. But this morning, we're continuing a series titled Follow, okay, where we're really trying to answer the question, what does it look like? What does it really look like to follow Jesus? And to help us answer that question, over 4 weeks, we are looking at 4 different narratives in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus asked either a person or a group of people to follow him. He asked them to follow him, and we're going to try to figure out what does it really mean to follow Jesus. Okay, last week we looked as Jesus called 4 fishermen to follow him, Simon, Andrew, James, and John, and we really got to see the answer to the question, why? Why should I follow Jesus even if I could? And this morning we're going to try to answer the question, who? Who? Okay, who can follow Jesus? What does it take to be that type of person? And this morning we're going to look, the guy that we're going to look at this morning, if you were to vote, okay, if you were to look at the available people that were around Jesus and vote, who is the least likely person to follow him? You would have voted for the guy that we're going to look at this morning. Okay, his name is Levi. He was a tax collector, and if from the outside looking in, he kind of looks like, man, this isn't somebody that you would think would follow Jesus. If other people miss it, we're going to find out that Levi had, when it comes to what it takes to be someone who follows Jesus, Levi had exactly what it takes. Let's find out what it was. Who is the type of person Jesus calls to follow him? Let's pick up the story where Jesus has an encounter with an unsuspecting man named Levi. Mark chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. It says, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. And so Jesus, he finishes teaching. He's on his way back home, and as he's on his way back home, walking beside the lake, he comes across a tax collector's booth, a toll booth that was manned by a tax collector named Levi. So a little about tax collectors in Jesus' age. Tax collectors, they were the most despised and hated people in all of first century Israel. Okay, a tax collector was an Israelite man who was employed by the Roman government. In Rome, they were the ruling people over Israel at that time. And so he was employed by the Roman government to collect taxes from the people of Israel. He was employed by the Romans to tax his own people. And tax collectors, they were notorious for extorting money from other people. They would always charge way more than Rome actually required them to charge, and they would keep all of that excess money for themselves. Okay, they were getting rich off the backs of other people. Levi, most likely, he had spent his entire life his entire adult life, taking advantage of the people around him, taking advantage of his own countrymen. Levi, he was the most despised person in Israel. Tax collectors were, and he deserved it, rightfully so. No one wants anything to do with Levi. Okay, he is the most hated man in his country. That is no one except for Jesus. Let's keep reading, and Jesus has something he wants to tell Levi. The rest of verse 14, he says, follow me, Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. Now, that's a very, very significant thing that Levi did that. Listen, when he got up, Jesus calls him to follow him. Levi gets up, he leaves his toll booth, he leaves his workstation, and he starts to follow Jesus. Now, that was very significant because even though a tax collector, they were kind of looked down on by society, it was still a very lucrative position. Okay, and there were a lot of people that were lined up that wanted that job. So when Levi walks away and he just abandons his toll booth, he knows that there's going to be someone there to take his place. And he just leaves it. He leaves this incredibly lucrative career to follow Jesus. Now, why would he do that? Why would he do that? I think, personally, that Levi, I think he felt guilty. I think he had a weight of guilt on his shoulders. Now, I can understand that. I know what it feels like to be guilty and to live with guilt. My senior year of high school, I remember or my freshman year of high school, I remember I was struggling with my Spanish class, okay? I worked at it. No matter what I did, I could not figure out Spanish. And so my grades were rough. And so in order to kind of boost my grade a little bit in my Spanish class, if you think back to when you were in school and you're struggling, what would you have done? Maybe study a little harder, talk to the teacher, maybe get a tutor. Well, I went a little different route. And so my dad was actually my high school principal. And so he had a master key to every room in the entire school. So what I did to boost my Spanish grade, my freshman year of high school, on the weekends, I stole my dad's key off of his keychain. I broke into our school. I broke into my Spanish teacher's classroom. I went to her desk. I opened her desk, and I pulled out her grade book. Okay, now this is for younger people. This is like mid-90s, okay? So they didn't have computers on every desk. And so they kept your grades in a grade book. So I just pulled out my Spanish teacher's grade book and I just changed my grades. A 60 became an 80. A 45 became a 95. Literally, the only reason I passed Spanish my freshman year of high school was I broke in and I changed all my grades. There's no bueno. No bueno. Only phrase I learned that entire year. But I was a liar. I was a liar. I would lie just to see if I could get away with it. And it wasn't just when I was a teenager. My wife and I, we have this, with our bank, we have this budgeting software on our phone, or with our bank, that it basically puts all of our money in different categories. But whenever we spend money, now we switched to this about a few months ago, it gives a text to the other person. So we know like how it's supposed to keep, it's mainly for me, to keep us accountable for how we're spending our money. And I hate it. I hate it. I hate it because now I have to be 100% honest with how I spend our money. And I don't want to, because honestly, I'm a liar. I hate it. The summer that I turned 18, I remember I got drunk or high every day for 4 straight weeks. Every day for 4 straight weeks. From the ages of 16 to 26, I had experiences with women, sexual experiences with women that today they're married to other men. Listen, I have a complete lack of self-control in my life. And it wasn't just when I was a teenager. Today, more times than I'd have to admit, I hate to admit, I have to find myself apologizing to my kids because I lost my temper with them. Listen, I am guilty. There are things in my life, I have done things in my life that I wish I would not have done. Okay, I have done things in my life for which I feel guilty. I feel guilty. I carry guilt. There's things that I wish I wouldn't have done. I think that's what Levi feels right here. When Jesus saw Levi, he saw a man deeply distressed by the weight of his guilt. Deeply distressed by the weight of guilt. He saw a man who realized he needed to be forgiven. And my assumption here is that Levi and myself were not the only ones. Okay, let's just think through this a little bit. What if we were, let's just say I had on video, okay, just little thought experiment for all of us here. I had on video every action that you have done and every thought that you have thought for the past 7 days. Okay, just think about it, just the past 7 days, okay? I had every action you have done and every thought that you have thought for the past 7 days. And I took all of that footage, I put together a 2-hour video, okay? Instead of finishing this sermon, we're just gonna pass out popcorn and we're gonna put it on these screens and we're just all gonna watch it together, okay? Every action you've done and every thought that you've thought for the past 7 days. Would anybody just be a little bit nervous? A little bit nervous? Yes. There's things in our life that we've done that we wish we wouldn't have done. Every single one of us, myself, Levi, everyone here, there's things in our life that we've done for which we feel guilty. It was true of Levi. It's true of us, and we're going to see it's also true of others. Verse 15, it says, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples. So Levi, he starts to follow Jesus, then invites into his home to have dinner with many tax collectors and sinners. Hey, so why are they there? Why are they there? Why are there so many tax collectors and sinners there to follow Jesus? Well, just like Levi, these people that they were categorized tax collectors and sinners, this most likely were criminals, okay? Just thugs, thieves, prostitutes. These were people who were outside of the religious circle of the day, but these are the people that Jesus chose to spend time with. These are the people that Jesus chose to be close with. He said that the difference, that what they knew about themselves is they knew that they needed forgiveness. They were sinners and they knew it. They were sinners and they knew it, and that's who Jesus chooses to be close to. That's who Jesus chose to spend this meal with, to eat a meal with. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't typically just invite anybody into my home, any random stranger into my home to have a meal. And I don't just typically, go eat a meal with anybody that invites me into their home. If we go into a home to share a meal, typically two things are true. It typically communicates two things. One, I accept you. If we're sharing a meal in a home together, it communicates we accept each other. And two, I want to be your friend. You're somebody that I want to be close to. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to communicate here to these group of people. People called them, they were just a group, tax collectors and sinners. But Jesus says, hey, you, because of who you are, because of how you recognize yourself, you're the people that I choose to be close with. You're the ones that I want to know, the ones that knew that they needed the forgiveness that Jesus came to offer. That's who Jesus chooses to draw near to. Well, let's keep reading it, and Mark's going to introduce us to some other people, though, who Jesus really could do without. Verse 16, it says, when the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Okay, so there's this other group of people that are there on the outside of the meal called Pharisees. Okay, Pharisees, they were a group of about 6,000 men in the time of Jesus who viewed themselves as the religious elite. Okay, they just kind of viewed themselves as the religious elite. They were sinners too. They just couldn't admit it. Okay, they looked down on other people. They judged other people. They didn't view themselves as someone who needed forgiveness. And because of that, Jesus, he was constantly at odds with these people. Look how he responds to him there. They're saying, hey, why is he eating dinner with these tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus says, on hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. You see, in essence, Jesus, he sees these proud men who are proud of their own righteousness, proud of the things that they've done, proud of the life that they've lived. They don't view themselves as needing help at all. They don't view themselves as people who need forgiveness. Jesus, he looks at these men, he says, if that's how you view yourself, there's nothing I can do to help you. Listen, I have come to help the people who realize that they need it. I've come to offer forgiveness to the people who are willing to admit that they've done wrong, willing to admit that that's something that they need. In December, I had a surgery on my left shoulder. I had a torn rotator cuff in my left shoulder. The thing is, I actually injured my shoulder probably about 1.5 to 2 years before I ever went to actually see my doctor. I don't know, it wasn't like this big traumatic injury, and so I probably slightly injured my shoulder when I was lifting weights one day, and I had like a very slight tear in my rotator cuff. Well, like a genius, I just kept pushing through it. I was like, it's fine. It's fine. I'm not going to the doctor. It's going to take too much time. I don't want to work at it. I don't want to go. It's fine. So I just kind of pushed through for the next, 1.5 and 2 years until eventually I get to the point I can't lift my arm above my head. And it's like, okay, now I have to go to the doctor. Okay, I've got to use my left arm. And so I go to the doctor, and it's annoying that I have to go, take time out of my day, go to the doctor, do all these tests, spend all this money. And that whole process was annoying, but was really, really frustrating is when he told me, hey, what started out as just this slight tear in my rotator cuff, he goes, if you just would have come and talked to me earlier, we could have done something about it. What started out as this slight tear that could have been healed just through physical therapy was now a full tear on the top of my rotator cuff, a full tear on the front, and they had to reattach my bicep. Okay, I would have saved myself so much time, pain, and money if I just would have went to the doctor when things first started hurting. He could have fixed me at any point in time over that 1.5 before that. The only problem was I didn't go ask for help. Listen, nothing could be done for me until I admitted that I had a problem, until I admitted that I needed help. He couldn't do anything for me. Hey, what does it take? What does it take to follow Jesus? Who is the person who Jesus is calling to follow him? Listen, it's not the person who has everything together. It's the person who admits that they need the help that only Jesus can give. Another way to put it is like this. Jesus calls those who are the furthest to come the closest. Jesus calls those who are the furthest to come the closest. Jesus, he's not asking us to get our life together. He's not asking us to get everything right. Jesus, he's asking you to admit and to recognize that you need the forgiveness that only he can offer. You see, that's why he came. Jesus came, he lived a perfect life. He died on a cross. He came back to life 3 days later so he could pay the price for your sins and offer you forgiveness for your sins. You just have to admit that that's something you need, that you need the forgiveness that only Jesus can offer. Jesus calls those who are the furthest, those who recognize that they are far from him. That's who Jesus calls to come the closest. Jesus calls those who are the furthest to come the closest. So how do we do that? How do we kind of take some steps in that direction? This morning, I just want to give you guys 2 questions to kind of consider. Okay, 2 questions to consider based off of Jesus's illustration there with the doctor. So two kind of questions to consider. The first question, we're going to have it up here on the screen, is do you recognize your need for a doctor? The first question is, do you recognize your need for a doctor? Okay, has there been a point in time in your life where you said, I'm guilty, okay? I have done things in my life that I wish I would not have done. Okay, I've done things in my life for which that I feel guilty. Has there been a point in time in your life where you've simply acknowledged that to Jesus? Jesus, I need the forgiveness that only you can give me. Man, if you can't think of a time where you've done that and you've accepted the forgiveness that Jesus wants to give you, I would love to talk to you about that. Okay, you can find me back here if you don't want to talk face to face on your card, your next steps card. There's a spot where you can say, hey, I'm interested in talking to somebody about what it means to connect with Christ. I would love to talk with you about that. But is there a time in your life where you've acknowledged, hey, I need a doctor. I've accepted the forgiveness that only Jesus can give me. Number 1, do you recognize your need for a doctor? Number 2, are you giving any referrals? Are you giving any referrals? Listen, do people know your doctor? If there's a time, if you're like, man, I've already done that. I've accepted that forgiveness from Jesus. Are you giving any referrals? Do people know your doctor? Do people know where you have your hope, where you got the forgiveness that only Jesus can give you? Your friends, your neighbors, your families, do they know your doctor? Are you giving any referrals? And so Jesus, he calls those who are the furthest. Okay, not those who have it all together, not those who have their life straight. Jesus calls those who are the furthest to come the closest to him. Hey, as we close, I just wanted to read this quote that I came across this week as I was kind of preparing for this. I think it kind of really summarizes what we see here in just this interaction with Levi and Jesus. It says, the one person for whom Jesus can do nothing is the person who thinks himself so good that he does not need anything done for him. The one person for whom Jesus can do everything is the person who is a sinner and a failure, who knows it, and who longs in his heart of hearts for a cure. Who longs in his heart of hearts for a cure. Who is the person that Jesus calls to follow him? The person who realizes that they need it. The person who realizes they need the forgiveness that only he can offer. Man, imagine the difference that would make just in our city if people knew that. If people knew that Jesus wasn't calling people to get everything right and just to perform. If people in our city, imagine the hope that would give. Imagine the peace people would feel as guilt is lifted off of their shoulders. Imagine the difference it would make in our city if people only knew that Jesus, he didn't come to call the righteous. Jesus, he came to call sinners. Sinners just like you and me. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you just for this truth. God, I think just in our minds, we always think it's, I've got to perform, I've got to do better, I've got to, my good has to outweigh my bad. Lord, thank you that you didn't come for that. You came to offer us forgiveness. Father, and I just pray for all of us here. I pray that we would recognize that truth. Lord, if there's some here in this room this morning, they can't recall a moment in their life to where they have reached out to you and just simply said, Jesus, I am a sinner, and I need forgiveness. I need forgiveness that only you can give. And I pray that they would make that decision and put their trust in you. And Lord, I pray if that is true, if there's some of us here that have made that decision, I pray that we would tell that good news. Tell that good news to everyone that we come across. Jesus, thank you so much for the hope and the peace that you offer. And we just pray all of this in your precious name. Amen.